superior to the PA. That is why it is called as detransposition. And the blood which will actually physiologically, if we see the blood which is going from RA, RV into the aorta, it is constituting nothing but right to left shunt. And whatever blood which will go from LA, LV to the PA, it will be the left to right shunt. And whatever mixing happens across any intracardiac or extracardiac defect, it will be contributing either to the QEP or QES. We'll be discussing this subsequently. So as I told, the anatomically the RA, RV and aorta are in connection, and the LA, LV, PA are in connection, which are constituting the right to left and left to right shunt respectively. And anything which goes from the right side, anatomical right side to the left side, is basically QEP, because that is the deoxygenated blood which is going to the pulmonary circuit for oxygenation. And anything which goes from left side to the aorta, that is the which will constitute the QES, that is the blood which is going for tissue oxygenation. So in DTGA, we have two independent parallel circuits, and it is essentially a cyanotic CHD. DTGA can't be without cyanosis. And hello? Hello?
Yeah, Gaurav.
Okay. So most common cause, it is the most common cause of cyanotic CHD in a newborn up to 1 month of age. Beyond the neonatal period, the most common cause of cyanotic CHD will be TOF. The incidence of DTGA is around 5% of all CHDs, and it numerically it accounts for around 3 in 10,000 live births. It has a strong male preponderance. Ratio is about more than 4:1, and the incidence increases with third born or a fourth born child. So coming to the risk factors, it is most commonly found in infants of diabetic mother. So these are large for gestational age babies who are chubby and they are cyanotic blue. Their birth weight is usually more than 8 pounds. And another determined risk factor is excessive vitamin A intake by the mother during pregnancy. And they say that many studies have been done, and they have found that the effects of diabetes and this excessive vitamin A can be reversed with vitamin E intake during the pregnancy. Then next is maternal alcohol intake, NSAID intake like ibuprofen, and influenza infection or pesticide exposure to the mother. Important things what we need to remember in contrast to CCTGA for a DTGA, it is a cyanotic CHD. It is associated with normal conduction, whereas CCTGA, we know that the incidence of CHB at birth and progressive attrition and development of CHB is quite high. And CCTGA 25% cases can have dextro or a mesocardia, and 5% cases can have this thing, situs inversus. Whereas if we talk about DTGA, most of the cases are usually situs solitus and levocardia. Only rarely they have situs inversus or dextrocardia. So apart from that, DTGA can rarely be associated with heterotaxy, and it is more common with asplenia rather than polysplenia. The recurrence rate in siblings is around 1.7%. Coming to the embryology, there are two basic theories. The first theory, which is less accepted and mostly rejected nowadays, is the straight conal septal theory. We all know that the aorticopulmonary septum, which is formed from the conotruncal ridges, that is having spiral rotation during development. But they say that if there is lack of this rotation, this can lead to a DTGA kind of physiology, but that is not accepted. The more accepted theory is the differential conal development theory, which is given by the Van Praag and Anderson. They say that at the beginning, both subaortic and subpulmonary conus are present, and eventually in a normal embryology, the subpulmonary conus persists and the subaortic conus resolves. Whereas in case of DTGA, the opposite happens. That is, the subaortic conus remains and the subpulmonary conus is resolved. And they have found that intake of vitamin A has induced this differential conal developmental theory, and that is why they have kept it as one of the risk factors. So thereby, we all can understand that because the RV is connected to the aorta and there is a subaortic conus, so there will be a tricuspid aortodiscontinuity and a mitropulmonary continuity. And the aorta will be coming from the RV. So the aorta will be right and it will be anterior. That is, it will be demalposed. So according to the spatial nomenclature of Van Prague, it will be S, that is
So,
situs.
Gaurav,
Yeah, ma'am.
regarding this conal development, so the basic theory is whichever artery has the well-developed conus will be anterior.
Anterior, yes, ma'am.
So,
Yes.
because aorta has the conus, the aorta is anterior. But only thing which does not fit into this theory is there is around 6 to 8% of TGAs which can have normally related great arteries. That is
Okay,
TGA
ma'am.
with right posterior aorta.
Okay.
So that is one thing which cannot be explained by differential conal development.
Okay. I had included
continue.
this the other spatial orientation, ma'am. But the one thing which you just now told, that 6 to 8% cases have a right and posterior aorta. Actually, I didn't know. So I will add it.
I don't know. Maybe it is given in the old Mawson Adams. I think.
Okay.
Somewhere
Okay.
it is given.
Shall I go ahead, ma'am?
Yeah, please.
So
Continue.
it will be a spatial orientation will be situs solitus. So there will be D-looping, as we know that the RV is on the right of the LV, and there will be demalposition. So SDD. And exception, as ma'am was mentioning, like 6 to 8% cases have a normal great arterial relationship. And Moss mentions that about 1/3 cases of DTGA also can have either a antero-posterior great artery relationship or a L-malposed aorta. So the orientation can be any of these three, and the fourth one with a normal relation. So this is the most common relation where we have a right and anterior aorta. We can also have L-malposed or a direct antero-posterior, as ma'am had mentioned in her last discussion. And the important thing that we need to remember.
Or you can have sometimes side by side also.
Yes, ma'am. Side by side, Taussig Bing and this thing I have covered, ma'am, subsequently. This thing, when we are doing a bedside echo, what we will see is two great arteries which don't cross. In a normal circuit, we find that the aorta is in the center and the PA is coming like this on the echo short axis. Whereas here we will find that there are two circles which are coming up, but they are not crossing. So coming to the associated lesions, I thought we will discuss the anatomy in details and then we'll move on to the physiology. So associated lesions, the most common lesion is a VSD. So what did Van Prague say is that this is the right side of the septum, RV side of the septum. So this is the this I have made in normal person. So this is the tricuspid valve, this is the pulmonary valve, and this is the tricuspid subvalvular apparatus. So we all know that the lower extent divides the inlet septum, and here the crista supraventricularis divides the supracrystal and infracrystal part of the septum, and this is the septomarginal claviculation. So Van Prague says that the conoventricular VSDs or the perimembranous VSDs, they are actually located between the two limbs of this SMT, and this area is the area of the conoventricular VSD. And in all types of conoventricular defects, what happens is the septomarginal claviculation undergoes an anti-clockwise rotation, and this leads to different kinds of conoventricular VSDs with malalignment, and that is responsible for various types of CHD, which are associated with conoventricular anomalies. So in this way, Van Prague aimed to explain the coexistence of different type of VSDs with malalignment. And the most common type of VSD which we find in DTGA is the conoventricular or the perimembranous. But DTGA is one anomaly where all the other types of VSDs can also happen. So as I said, the most common is conoventricular, and the least common is the doubly committed subarterial VSD. Because there can be malalignment of the conal septum, the posterior malalignment of the conal septum is quite common here, which leads to a subpulmonary obstruction. As we can understand that the pulmonary artery is left and posterior, so any posterior malalignment will lead to a subpulmonary obstruction. Rarely there can be anterior malalignment also, which leads to subaortic obstruction, and extreme degrees of anterior malalignment is associated with a DORV kind of anatomy and a subpulmonic VSD. So that will come to be classified as the Taussig Bing anomaly. And here we can also have the side-by-side great arterial relationship. Then apart from this, AV septal defects can also occur in DTGA, and they may be associated with the straddling of the tricuspid valve subvalvular apparatus. Coming to the next associated anatomic defect is the LVOT obstruction, which is found in around 20% of the cases. It can be either a fixed obstruction or a dynamic obstruction. So fixed obstruction, as one point we already discussed, will be posterior malalignment. The second they say is can be due to tissue tags or muscular ridges from the membranous septum. Where the perimembranous area is giving extensions, tissue tags or muscular ridges, which go across the subpulmonary area and cause the obstruction. And then there can be abnormal insertion of the mitral valve apparatus, and that can lead to subpulmonary obstruction. The important thing that we need to remember is when we are doing an echo for a DTGA baby, we always should look for LVOT obstruction and the mechanism. This is very important because this determines our treatment approach, which we'll come to subsequently. And how does dynamic LVOT obstruction happen is, it is classically seen in patients with a DTGA with VSD without any fixed LVOT obstruction more commonly. So once the neonatal PVR falls, the patient, the child will have unrestricted pulmonary blood flow, which will lead to LV volume overload. And because the RV is connected to the aorta, it is at a high pressure, and in the presence of VSD, it will shunt left to right, thereby leading to the LV volume overload. And because the RV is hypertensive, it shifts the IVS to the left. So the mitropulmonary apparatus, they are housed in a small cavity where the LV is volume overloaded. So because of this volume overloaded LV, using the Frank-Starling law, it contracts vigorously, and this creates the SAM of the mitral valve, leading to a dynamic LVOT obstruction. So important thing is that if the child has a dynamic LVOT obstruction, this child will start having this murmur after the fall in neonatal PVR, whereas the other subsets with fixed LVOT obstruction will find the murmur at birth itself. The next association is arch anomalies, which can be in the form of hypoplastic arch, coarctation, or interrupted aortic arch. These are more commonly seen with Taussig-Bing variety. And the next important thing is the juxtaposed right atrial appendage. So as we all can understand, the right atrial appendage is usually protruding. If we see the external cardiac anatomy, it is usually protruding anterior to the SVC and the aorta, and it does not extend to the left. Whereas in case of juxtaposition, you can see here the atrial appendage, it extends onto the left side, and above the left atrial appendages as a tongue-like protrusion. So what happens is the same thing which you will be seeing on an echo. So when you do an echo, what you will be thinking is that there is a ASD, but it is actually not. It is an extension of the right atrium. So clinically, how can you differentiate is, if the child is having a ASD, the ASD will be allowing some mixing. So the child will be less cyanotic. Whereas a child who has an intact septum with a juxtaposed appendage, and that is giving you the impression of ASD, that child will be deeply cyanotic. So that is one way clinically where we can think that it is what we are seeing is not an ASD, it is a juxtaposed appendage. And during the interventions, like balloon atrial septostomy, at that time, we might think that we have entered the LA, and that can lead to trauma to the LA appendage or the left atrium, leading to perforation or tamponade. So here I put an echo picture for us to understand. What happens is that this is the subcostal view. So in the subcostal view, we know that the atrial septum is aligned parallel to the diaphragm, whereas here we can see the atrial septum is kind of perpendicular. So this is one of the clues which tells us that the right atrial appendage is kind of juxtaposed, and here we can make out that it is protruding like this above the left atrial appendages, and the atrial septum is perpendicular. It is not the normal orientation. So the left juxtaposition of the right atrial appendage is 6 times more common than the right juxtaposition of the left atrial appendage, and it is quite commonly seen in females with TGA. So as I already told, you should not confuse with an ASD. Yes, ma'am?
One easy way of identifying a juxtaposed appendage, when you take a 4-chamber view,
Yes, ma'am.
When CS is dilated, you see that chamber, no, going across LA towards RA.
Yeah,
So
ma'am.
on what tilt you get CS compared to 4-chamber view?
Posteriorly, ma'am. You will have to tilt the probe posteriorly.
So when you tilt the probe posteriorly, you get a CS, right?
Yeah.
Suppose you are seeing a chamber similar to CS when you tilt anteriorly, anterior to
Okay.
4-chamber view. You will see a chamber extending from RA towards LA
Okay, ma'am.
in 4. So that will be actually the appendage which is going towards the left.
Left.
So initially you may think there's a dilated CS, but you will realize it is in an anterior plane, not in a posterior plane. And when you take parasternal long axis view, you will see an extra circle in the LA.
Okay, ma'am.
When you usually you'll see a dilated CS, but sometimes you
Yeah.
may find another chamber inside LA. So
Okay,
that is a
so
juxtaposed
like
appendage.
here, ma'am, here what we see, we will see one more circle here in the end. Hello.
What are you drawing?
Ma'am, the parasternal long axis, ma'am. This is the LA.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second.
Hmm.
This is the coronary sinus which we see usually. So as you are saying, ma'am, above this we will see.
Yeah, little
like,
above. Yeah, above. Yeah,
okay, ma'am.
you may see another circle.
Okay. Got it.
So what is the implication? Apart from intervention, apart from balloon?
No, ma'am.
Others
Hello.
can answer.
During the
Uh-huh.
atrial switch
Yeah,
procedure,
Arun.
during atrial switch procedures, if
Mm.
if there is a juxtaposition, then it will be difficult to do. It can't be done.
It is difficult to do baffle.
Baffle.
RA volume will become significantly less.
Small.
And surgeons will, it's almost, at least our surgeons refuse to do switch if there is appendage, if there is a juxtaposed appendage. So it is not just a theoretical interest, okay?
Yes.
If you work with pediatric cardiology and if you're seeing TGAs, it is imperative that you look for a juxtaposed appendage from surgeon's point of view. Okay. Yeah, continue.
The incidence of juxtaposition is around 25 to 30% of all cases of DTGA, and it can even be found in anatomically corrected malpositions up to 2 to 6% cases. And as ma'am told, that during BAS and atrial switch, that may give a false impression. So moving on, the next anomalies will be the tricuspid valve anomalies, which can be seen in 30% cases, and the mitral valve anomalies have also been described in about 20% of the cases in the form of a cleft mitral valve or straddling mitral valve. The next important thing will be the coronary anomalies, which are quite common here. So the rule always will be the coronaries always arise, even for a normal patient or anyone, they will always arise from the facing sinuses. So now because the aorta is anterior and the PA is posterior, so they will arise from the left and the right posterior facing sinuses. So there have been multiple descriptions of the coronary anomalies in DTGA, but the Yakub and Ridley Smith is the one which is important. So I thought we'll discuss this. So the type A is the most common, that is the normal orientation where so this is the left, this is the right, and that is anterior and posterior. So the LMC arises from the left sinus and divides into LAD, LCX, and the right sinus gives rise to the RCA. And this is the most common type. Then type B is where they say that all the coronaries will arise from the single sinus. Either it can be left sinus, it can be right sinus, but they will arise from one single sinus, and the number of ostium can be 1 or 2. That is not a fixed thing. Then type C is where the coronaries are arising from two different sinuses only, but the origin is very close. The ostia are very close and they have an intramural course. So this kind of coronary anatomy is at risk because of the intramural course. And then the type D will be where the LAD is coming separately from the left sinus and the LCX is arising anomalously from the right sinus along with the RCA and is going behind the PA, posterior to the PA and coming into the left AV groove. And the type E will be where LAD and RC are arising from the left sinus, and the circ is arising from the right sinus, anomalously going behind the PA and going to the left TVT. The important thing for us to remember is, except type B, all other types, they have a dual sinus origin. So more than 90% cases have a dual sinus origin, and type B is the only type with a single sinus origin. And contrast to CCTGA, where the SA nodal artery comes from the circ, here the SA nodal artery usually comes from RCA. Moving on to the anatomical classification of TGA. This 1, 2, 3, I have just kept it as a convenience for our discussion. It is not named as 1, 2, 3. So the first and the most common type is TGA with intact ventricular septum, and it accounts for more than 50% of the cases. So here we can see that there is no VSD and there are two independent parallel circuits. This child definitely needs a ASD or a PDA to make the survival possible. Then the second type is a TGA with VSD, where the VSD is the intracardiac defect, and it will allow some mixing. The third type is TGA with VSD with LVOT obstruction, which behaves like a TOF physiology when the obstruction is severe and there is reduced pulmonary blood flow. So these two types, where there is an associated VSD or a VSD with LVOTO, these are called as complex TGAs, whereas the first type is called as a simple TGA. And the fourth most rare type is DTGA with intact IVS with LVOT obstruction. So as I said, there are the type 1 is most common, two independent circuits and not compatible with life unless there is some communication.
Gaurav, one second. Madam?
Yeah, Varshit.
Yeah.
Madam, this TGA, like once you said, no, once you had told in the class that ASD, VSD or PDA, any of the things associated with TGA, all are simple TGA.
No. VSD is not. ASD, PDA is simple TGA.
Okay.
Because they are like fetal shunts, no? ASD and PDA. So that is simple TGA. VSD is a complex TGA.
Okay.
Continue.
Yeah. So the type 3 is the type where LVOT obstruction can vary from mild to severe. And if it is severe, it acts like a TOF physiology. Ma'am, here I had one doubt that basically transposition is PA saturation more than aortic saturation. But when we are talking about type 3 with severe LVOT obstruction, where the physiology is TOF physiology with a reduced pulmonary blood flow, still here, ma'am, the PA saturation will be more than aortic saturation only, na?
Yeah, because it is getting the LV blood,
Oxygenated.
no?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Although the pulmonary blood flow is reduced, but like what we see in TOF, where the aorta and PA saturation both are low, but the PA is lower than the aorta. That won't be seen here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that won't be seen here. See, one thing is, there are two things. One is transposition physiology. Another is just the word transposition. The word transposition means the great arteries are across the septum. That's all.
Okay.
Transposition physiology can exist with other anatomies also. But when you just say the word transposition, it is about the anatomy you're talking.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah. Continue.
So this was in brief about the anatomy. Now moving on to the physiology, what happens in the TGA circulation. So the basic thing just now we discussed that PA sat is more than aortic saturation, and that is why it is called as a complete transposition, because the transposition physiology is completed here. Whereas in CCTGA it is corrected because of the double discordance, and thereby it is a non-cyanotic CHD usually. So what are the other conditions where transposition physiology can happen? The first, as we have already discussed, would be the Taussig Bing. So I thought as a clinical thing, we should know how can we differentiate. So usually DTGA, we say that the aorta is anterior, PA is posterior. We do not hear the P2 most of the time. So it gives the impression of a single loud A2 or a single loud S2. So whereas in Taussig Bing, usually we will hear the split of the S2 and there will be left axis deviation on the ECG, compared to transposition where we usually have right axis deviation. Then supracardiac TAPVC, although it is an admixture physiology, but they say that there can be some streaming of the oxygenated blood from the SVC to the PA via the RA-RV, and this can give impression of a transposition physiology. So then again, here also clinically we can differentiate with a wide fixed split S2 and the features of a ASD, clinical features of an ASD apart from cyanosis. Then the next thing will be persistent truncus also can have some streaming of the oxygenated blood into the PA circuit. But the important thing is there will be a ejection click. There will be a single S2, which is associated with the ESM and the EDM at the base. So this is how we can differentiate a truncus from a transposition. Then next will be a single ventricle of LV type that can also be associated with streaming and transposition kind of picture. So again, here also there will be a left axis deviation on ECG, and important thing is there will not be any RV hypertrophy. Features of RV hypertrophy will not be there on the ECG. The next DD will be a type 2C tricuspid atresia, where we will have a LV type of apex, and there will be left axis deviation on the ECG and no RV hypertrophy. So these are the common situations where we can find transposition kind of picture.
Ma'am, one doubt here. Can we label the supracardiac TAPVC tricuspid atresia as a transposition physiology, which are actually admixture physiologies?
I don't know. I don't know why Gaurav has written. I wouldn't give examples for transposition, TAPVC and tricuspid atresia.
Okay.
You have to, Gaurav, where did you find this list?
Ma'am, this was given in Tandon, ma'am. Basically, when he has the chapter in which he has described the different kind of circulations and physiology, there he has mentioned the transposition. Basically, he tries to mean that if you take the PA saturation and the aortic saturation, so the same thing what happens in transposition can be seen in all of these conditions also sometimes.
Yeah, but I think you will be in trouble if you mention this.
Okay, ma'am.
Because supracardiac TAPVC, I don't know how you can say streaming happens to.
Ma'am, even Moss mentions that supracardiac TAPVC has a streaming, which can give the impression of a transposition circuit.
Okay, but overall TAPVC and tricuspid atresia are classic examples
tricuspid
of
atresia will be admixture.
Admixture physiology.
Yeah.
Ultimately, clinically for you, what does it matter that PA flows are good, but saturation is not as much as you would expect in the presence of normal PVR.
Yes, ma'am.
What has Soumya written?
Hello. Hello.
It's only DD for high PA saturation.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
So we'll be discussing chest X-ray subsequently, but what is the common thing which we see in TGA is a narrow pedicle. So the narrow pedicle is classically seen in TGA. We can also find the narrow pedicle in a truncus and a single ventricle. So moving on, what is QP, what is QS, QEP, QES, we all know. So in the beginning only we had discussed that what is anatomical shunt and what is the physiological shunt. So what is happening is that anything which comes from the left side to the right side, that is anatomical left to right shunt, is contributing to the QES, and anything which is going opposite, right to left, is QEP. So mixing is essential in DTGA for the baby to survive, and we know that there can be three sites of mixing: ASD, VSD, and a PDA. If we talk in terms of isolated defects, ASD will allow the best mixing because it allows a regulated amount of mixing and it allows an adequate mixing. Like during systole, when the AV valves are closed, the LA pressures are slightly higher as compared to RA pressures because of the non-compliant LA. So there will be a QES. The left to right shunt will contribute to the QES. And during diastole, when the AV valves are open, as the RV is connected to the aorta, so RV-EDP is higher. So thereby RA pressures will be higher, and that is why it will be shunting right to left now, and thereby contributing to QEP. So we can understand that in the both phases of the cardiac cycle, there is opposite mixture happening, and that will allow the baby to survive.
Gaurav, can you just repeat this AST once again? Some voice disturbance was there.
Basically, Arun, what happens is that during systole, ventricular systole, when the AV valves are closed, so the LA pressure will be slightly higher as the LA is non-compliant. Normally also, LA is less compliant as compared to RA. So the LA pressures will be slightly higher. Thereby, it will allow a left to right shunt. And this left to right shunt will be what? It will be a QES, basically, because the blood will eventually be going to the aorta, systemic circuit. And during diastole, when the AV valves open, the RA pressure will reflect the RVEDP, which obviously will be higher than the LVEDP because the RV is connected to the aorta. So the shunting will be right to left, RA to LA, and thereby the blood will be going to the pulmonary circuit and thereby contributing to a QEP. And thus, in both phases of the cardiac cycle, because there will be intermixing, and this will allow the baby to survive. And this will be the best mixing for a baby with an isolated defect, if you talk. Then next will be the VSD. VSD also will be helpful, but problem with the VSD is it can lead to complications. So as we can understand, during systole, the RV pressure will be higher because RV is connected to the systemic circuit, and thereby RV will be shunting to the left, and that will contribute to the QEP. And during diastole, because the RV has contributed to the left-sided circulation, the more blood is going to the pulmonary circuit, which will be returning back to the LA and LV, and thereby during diastole, LVDP will be higher, and thereby during diastole, LV will shunt now to the right side, and it will contribute to the QES. So similar to the ASD, here also mixing is happening. But what is the problem is that because with the VSD is usually a non-restrictive VSD, there will be unregulated pulmonary blood flow, which initially will lead to CHF and development of PVOD, which occurs very earlier in a DTGA baby as compared to a baby with a normal VSD, like a regular VSD, and plus a baby with a DTGA with intact IVS. Compared to those babies also, DTGA with VSD will develop much earlier PVOD. So although mixing is adequate here, development of CHF and PVOD is inevitable. And that is why VSD is not something which is going to help us or the baby. So
why this in this diastole, it will shunt from LV to RV in case of VSD?
see, basically, Varshit, what is happening during systole, RV blood is going to the LV, or basically RV blood is going to the pulmonary circuit, right?
Okay.
From the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary artery, the blood will come back through the pulmonary veins into the LA-LV. So the LV EDP will increase. And because the LVDP will be higher, during diastole, because of the VSD, now the LV blood will shunt to the right side during diastole.
No, in the systole, even LV blood should go into the aorta also, no? Because both are it's a non-restrictive and both are
no,
contracting simultaneously.
Because we are talking about the subset where the VSD is not having, the child is not having any LVOT obstruction. So considering the fact that pulmonary circuit is at a low resistance, so and LV is connected to the PA, so all of the LV blood will be going to the PA, whereas the RV blood, which is supposed to go into the, but because the systemic vascular resistance is high, RV blood will be shunting to the PA or the left side, similar to a regular VSD worship, not have to put anything additional. Hello.
Okay.
So, but a child who has a DTGA with VSD with a mild to moderate obstruction, LVOT obstruction, that child will be very well managed because he will have a balanced circulation, because the LVOT obstruction is providing some kind of a regulated pulmonary blood flow, and thereby this child will have the highest chances of survival and least chances of CHF and PVOD in the beginning. And that is why more than 75% of this subset make it beyond 1 year. But when we talk about severe LVOT obstruction, these children will have severely compromised pulmonary blood flow and they will have intense cyanosis, and they will present like a tough kid, and they will die very early because of the poor pulmonary blood flow and intense cyanosis. And this is the worst subset in a TGA. Similar kind of thing happens when the child develops PVOD with a DTGA VSD. Moving on to the third communication, that is the PDA. Now the PDA is a very labile kind of physiology which is providing here. The PDA is dependent on PVR-SVR ratio. And we all know that at birth, the PVR and SVR ratio is almost same. But in DTGA, the child is cyanotic from the time of birth, and the systemic circulation is having a cyanotic, hypoxic, hypercarbic blood. So what will happen? That will induce some degree of systemic vasodilatation. So compared to a normal child, the SVR at birth of a DTGA baby will be slightly lower. And the pulmonary circuit, because the child is hypoxic, so pulmonary circuit will be in a relatively vasoconstricted state. So compared to a normal child, the PVR will be higher in a child with DTGA at birth also. So the PDA during the immediately after birth and in the initial 1 to 2 days after birth, the PDA will be shunting bidirectionally. So during systole, what will happen when the semilunar valves are open? The circuit will be like LV blood will go to the PA, and from the PDA it will go to the aorta, thereby contributing to a QES. And when the AV valves close in the diastole, so the aorta and PA are in communication via the PDA, and the aorta blood will shunt to the PA, and thereby it will contribute to the QEP. But what is important for us to remember is this is all relative. The overall picture will be that the PVR tends to decrease starting from day 1 of birth. So overall, the predominant shunt will be aorta to PA, because PA will be always at a lower resistance as compared to the systemic circulation. So although the PA in the initial few days might allow some mixing and bidirectional shunting, but the eventual shunt is aorta to PA, and thereby PDA alone is not at all adequate for the child to survive. He may survive for 3-4 days with the PDA, but eventually isolated PDA will, what will it lead to is CHF, because once the PVR is sufficiently low for the shunting to become unidirectional, it will lead to pulmonary plethora and child will develop CHF. So the stage where the bidirectional shunt is happening with the PDA, if the PDA closes at this stage immediately, the child will have sudden death. And as I mentioned, the PDA is basically a source of unrestricted pulmonary blood flow, which can lead to CHF. And at this stage, because of the bidirectional shunt, we might find the reverse differential cyanosis in the newborn. So here the upper limbs will be blue and the lower limbs will be relatively less blue, or pink is what we can have in a reverse differential cyanosis. But as the PVR starts falling, the shunt becomes unidirectional, that is aorta to PA, and thereby child develops CHF and uniform cyanosis. So after discussing all this, do we actually need the PDA? We do need it because it facilitates the serial mixing. So what is serial mixing is, as we discussed, the PDA, what the PDA is allowing is predominantly a shunt from the aorta to the PA. So that is, it is contributing to the QEP, bringing the deoxygenated blood from the aorta to go to the pulmonary circuit for getting oxygenated. And this oxygenated blood, when it returns to the left side of the heart, that is via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium, it will increase the LA pressures, and thereby across the, if there is an ASD or a unrestricted PFO, what it will allow is a left to right, that is left atrium to right atrial shunt, and thereby it will contribute to a QES. So this is the concept of serial mixing, and this is what we achieve by doing a BAS. So any child who has a PDA, or even if he doesn't have a PDA, either way, if needed, if indicated, we'll do a BAS. But if we understand in terms of serial mixing, so if there is a PDA, then in association with a restrictive PFO or a ASD, if we do a BAS, what we will be doing is allowing adequate serial mixing. And this kind of physiology will be the best, and this will allow the child to sustain life for a relatively longer period as compared to an individual defect. And that is the rationale of doing the BAS. So moving on to the clinical presentation. So type 1 and 2, that is intact IVS and the VSD with unrestricted pulmonary blood flow. Classically, they will present with cyanosis from the first day of life with obviously increased pulmonary blood flow. And if the pulmonary blood flow is unregulated because of a VSD or a PDA, child will soon develop CHF as soon as the PVR starts falling down. And they will have cardiomegaly. So DTGA is one of the differentials where we have cyanosis with cardiomegaly with increased pulmonary blood flow. And more than 90% of these neonates will have this classical picture from the day 1 of life itself. So type 1 TGA, what is their natural history is they present with CHF, 30% will die within the first week, 50% within the first month, and 90% within the first year. That is unrepaired. And type 2 TGA, they will develop early PVOD. We'll discuss next why they will develop early PVOD. So,
Gaurav, type 1 TGA develops CHF at birth only, no? They'll be severely cyanotic, but they'll develop CHF when
your voice is
falls.
breaking, Mukesh.
Hello?
Yeah, I understood. See, basically what Moss says is that as soon as the PVR starts falling, it won't be like a regular VSD or a PDA where once the PVR has completely normalized after 4 to 6 weeks and then the child will present. Many a times if the PVR starts falling, even then also they can present with CHF because it's a very
because it is
unbalanced kind
additive
of
process.
surface.
That blood which shunts to right side gets trapped there only. So that is additive. Yeah, okay. But does it happen at birth?
No, I'm not saying with birth. See, I am saying with fall in PVR, they will have increased pulmonary blood flow, cyanosis, and cardiomegaly from day 1 of life. But if the pulmonary blood flow is unrestricted, as soon as the PVR starts falling, they will develop CHF. They might not essentially present on first day, but they can.
Okay.
Hello?
Okay. What is the question? I didn't get it.
Ma'am, whether CHF, the simple TGA presents with cyanosis or CHF on day 1?
Cyanosis. Simple TGA will not present with CHF. Okay. Though PVR falls, if you Anderson in TGA, though the PVR falls and QPQ might be slightly increased around 1.5:1. The main presenting symptom in a simple TGA is always cyanosis. And TGA with a VSD will not be picked up if the pediatrician is not astute enough. It will get missed up to 2 to 3 weeks of life, after which CHF sets in. Cyanosis will be very minimal or only detected on checking the saturation. So TGA VSD will present after 2 to 3 weeks with CHF. Simple TGA will present with cyanosis.
So, madam, TGA VSD will not have cyanosis at birth, ma'am.
Not able to hear you.
No, because they will have favorable mixing. So saturation will be low, but
Is audio clear for everyone?
Yes, ma'am. We are able to hear what you said, ma'am.
I think Lokesh's audio having some issues, ma'am.
Is it okay? I'll log in again.
Madam, TGA with VSD, they will not have cyanosis at birth.
They'll not have visible cyanosis. You will have desaturation.
Okay.
It will be around 85% or more. It's not.
Okay.
They are not as cyanosed as intact septum.
Okay.
Okay, ma'am. I'll make this correction. Hello.
Yeah, Gaurav.
So next we'll discuss why the patients with TGA VSD they develop early PVOD as compared to other subset. So these slides basically are.
One second, Gaurav. Sorry. See, you people have seen so many neonates, no, in our NICU. You have seen so many TGA intact septums getting operated. They are always comfortable. They don't breathe fast. They are feeding well. Only thing we monitor in them is saturation. and not failure. We don't give diuretics to them. Only those with VSDs are those who come with fast breathing. Okay. Is that clear?
Yeah, yeah, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Continue, Gaurav.
Yeah. So these 3 slides are from Shiv Kumar sir's presentation. So I don't want this thing. I don't want you to focus on so many things. Only thing that we want to focus is that what is happening in a TGA circuit is the fetal circulation, the RA-RV are not connected to PA, they are connected to the aorta. So what was supposed to go into the aorta was the IVC blood, which was relatively oxygen rich, is now going into the PA. So the PA saturation will be slightly higher, and the same blood will be going via the ductus into the aorta in the fetus. So what will happen? We all know that a higher oxygen saturation in the ductus induces ductus constriction, and the higher relatively oxygenated blood in the pulmonary circuit will cause relative pulmonary vasodilatation. So the amount of blood which will be returning via the pulmonary veins in the fetus with the TGA will be slightly higher as compared to other fetus. So the LA pressures will be slightly higher, and thereby it will lead to restriction of the PFO. Because the LA pressure is higher, it will lead to bulging of the PFO to the other side, thereby it restricts the PFO. And high oxygen levels in the ducts will lead to a ductus constriction and make the ductus small, and there will be increased pulmonary blood flow, and thereby from the fetal circulation itself, they will have relatively higher PVR as compared to a child who has a normal physiology. So what other causes have been mentioned for a high PVR are that the child with a DTGA can have aortopulmonary collaterals, and that aortopulmonary collaterals will give the hypoxic blood from the aorta to the PA circuit, and this will induce further increase in the PVR by inducing pulmonary vasoconstriction. The high flows and high pressure will obviously lead to protective vasoconstriction, and the PDA also, as we discussed, will be shunting the aorta blood to the PA. So that is also a deoxygenated blood only. So that will also contribute to the pulmonary vasoconstriction. Apart from that, endothelial damage, macrothrombi, all these things. And this will combinedly lead to a higher PVR and thereby early PVOD in a TGA child as compared to other child. Child who has a simple VSD, or a child who has a TGA with intact interventricular septum. So mortality in general, if you talk about TGA with a VSD with unrestricted pulmonary blood flow, at 6 months, 70% of these kids die, and at 1 year, around 80% of them will die. Coming to the clinical presentation of the third subset, a TGA child, this TGA child will have intense cyanosis because of restricted pulmonary blood flow from the day 1 of life itself, and these can have hypercyanotic spells. But important thing is that squatting or squatting equivalents are very rare. For that matter, in all other kinds of top physiology, most of the times squatting is relatively rare as compared to the anatomic TOF. Whereas the subset of type 3 TGA, that is DTGA intact, DTGA VSD with LVOT obstruction with mild to moderate obstruction, will have a balanced circulation, and they will do well and present later in life. They usually present beyond 2 to 3 years of life, and they can present with cyanosis, fatigue, dyspnea, but they tend to do well because most of them, like more than 75%, will survive beyond 1 year of life. And after BAS, how do we change the natural history is that 75% of the babies after BAS will survive till 6 months, and 65% will survive till 1 year. So BAS is not a curative thing. It is just buying us time for the definitive surgery. There were some surgeries done in the past which were considered as equivalent of BAS. That is surgical ASD creation, that is called as the Blaylock-Hanlon procedure. And Baffy's was, his idea was to do a rerouting of the pulmonary vein into the right atrium, creating a surgical PAPVC, and thereby creating a left to right shunt. But these are not done anymore. So clinical examination, the child will be chubby. He will be a large for gestational age male baby with cyanosis. DTGA in a female baby, don't miss juxtaposition. It is quite common there. And these babies, once they start developing CHF, they will become cachexic. And because there is a deoxygenated hypoxic blood into the systemic circuit, there is significant vasodilatation and venodilatation, and they develop venous varicosities. And because of the systemic vasodilatation, the pulse will be large volume pulse because of the low SPR. Now, we all know that PDA is one of the conditions where there is a high volume collapsing pulse. But in TGA with a PDA, the high volume pulse is paradoxically lost. It is not seen. So what the explanation here, what they say is that the PA here is not connected to the RA and RV. It is connected to the LA and LV. So the PDA blood, which is the shunted blood across the PDA that is going from the aorta to the PA, is not coming back to the RA and RV, which are connected to aorta. They are coming back. So the additional volume of blood which is being shunted is going back to the LA and LV, and thereby into the pulmonary circuit and not into the aortic circuit. So there are two prerequisites for having a high volume pulse. One is the higher systolic BP and the diastolic runoff, that is the lower diastolic BP. But here we can understand, because the shunt is not returning to the aorta, it is returning to the PA. There is systolic decapitation, and thereby we don't find the classical high volume pulse in a TGA with a PDA. So next is the JVP. So because the RV is connected to the high pressure aortic system. Ma'am? Yeah, ma'am.
I didn't get it. It got cut. Tell me again. High volume pulse, because it goes to LALV and back to PA.
So basically, ma'am,
there is a diastolic runoff, no, into the lung.
There is a diastolic runoff into the lung, but the other prerequisite, like what we classically, when we describe a collapsing pulse, is like because there is a volume overload of the LV in a general normal, like any other condition with a volume overload like AR or a PDA or a RSOV, the volume overload is on the LV side, which is being pushed into the aorta at a higher ejection rate. So there is a systolic, systolic peaking, and then there is a diastolic runoff. So both of these combined give the impression of a high volume, wide volume collapsing pulse. Whereas here what is happening is the LV is connected to the PA. So the LV blood is not going to the aorta. And because the LV blood is not going to the aorta, so the systolic upshoot which is happening is not happening here. Which is supposed to happen is not happening here. So this is the explanation which Perloff has given, ma'am.
But actually we don't find that clinically.
Large PDA we can get bounding pulses, no, ma'am.
Yeah, that is what. See, one thing what you said, Gaurav, if you have increased venous return to LV, you will have a systolic hypertension, because there is increased stroke volume into aorta.
The LV blood is going into the PA, right, ma'am? So
yeah, that may not happen, but still there is a diastolic runoff. So what we see when we give too much prostaglandin in TGA babies is the pulse starts becoming bounding.
There is diastolic.
By doing that, we think, okay, prostaglandin is too much, we have to reduce.
Diastolic runoff into pulmonary circulation, that is causing collapsing pulse. You're telling me on that, no?
Okay. But
not into the LV, but into pulmonary circulation.
Given, ma'am. So that is how I understood it. I'll correct remove this. This thing, maybe it was trying to like some controversial point mostly.
In MOS it's given saying high volume pulse in large TGA. I mean, sorry, large PDA, sorry, in TGA.
Okay. Okay. I'll correct this.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah. So JVP will have a prominent A wave because the RV is connected to the aorta, and thereby RVDP will be higher. So we'll expect a prominent A wave. And once they develop CHF, the mean JVP will rise with the increase in A and the V wave. So coming to the precordium, there will be a pressure overloaded RV, which will have a RV heave. Then there is a volume overloaded LV, which will give a hyperdynamic LV impulse at the apex. And as the aorta is anterior, and it will give a palpable A2 sometimes, not always. So moving on to auscultation, S1 is usually normal. There will be an ejection click because of the pulmonary dilatation, because most of the times there is increased pulmonary blood flow. So there will be pulmonary dilatation and it will give a ejection click. But this ejection click does not increase with inspiration. Now, why does it does not increase with inspiration is one of the reasons we can say that it's a vascular click, not a valvular click, which does not classically increase with inspiration. But the important thing here is, the more important reason is that the PA is not connected to the right-sided circuit, it is connected to the left-sided circuit. So during inspiration, the right-sided returns which are increasing are not going to the PA, they are going to the aorta. So thereby we don't expect the pulmonary ejection click to increase with inspiration here. Next, because of the RVOTO or LVOTO, there can be contralateral increased flow and flow murmurs. Then there can be respective RVOT or LVOT obstruction ESM murmurs. Then because of the dynamic LVOT obstruction, after the PVR falls, the ESM might come up. And then the VSD murmur, because it's a non-restrictive VSD, it can be a silent or a very short systolic murmur, or it can be a pansystolic murmur.
Gaurav,
Varshit?
Madam, this one in normal patients, like not in this TGA, regarding this pulmonary vascular click, ma'am, does pulmonary vascular click increases with the inspiration, ma'am, or it is constant click and not vary with respiration? Well,
Yeah,
that's what
it
I
is
had a
supposed to be
doubt.
constant.
Pulmonary click is supposed to be constant, no, ma'am?
Yeah, pulmonary click due to dilatation, vascular dilatation as in PH, is supposed to be a constant click.
Okay, okay. A valvular click, okay, it increases with expiration, but okay, okay.
Gaurav?
Yeah, the VSD murmur can be this thing, pansystolic also. And then the PDA murmur will be a systolic murmur only, because most of the times there will be diastolic equalization and the PDA will be shunting aorta to PA only in systole. So there will be a systolic murmur because of the PDA. And rarely these patients can have collaterals. So the collaterals can give rise to a continuous to a systolic murmur. Then flow murmurs across the AV valves, because if there is increased left-sided returns, there will be flow murmurs across the AV valves. There can be a ST. And once the pH develops, we can have a Graham-Steele murmur. Then if there are AV valve regurgitation, then there can be a PSM because of that also. And as we discussed, S2 is usually single. It is not that P2 is not there. P2 is there, but because it is posterior, it is not audible. So the loud A2 gives an impression of a loud single S2. But if at all we can hear the split, is the split sequence different here or it is normal? So it is usually normal. Not usually, it is supposed to be normal only because the split is dependent upon the hangout interval, not the VA concordance or discordance. So we all know why the P2 is delayed is normally also because of the increased hangout interval of the pulmonary circuit. So the same thing also applies here until as the child starts developing PH and PVOD. So the same physiology will be here, and the A2 will be earlier and the P2 will be later. With PVOD or PH, the split absolutely becomes loud and single because of the fusion of the A2 and P2. And as I said, RVS3 or LVS3 can be present. Moving on to the ECG, we can have either right atrial enlargement, left atrial enlargement, or biatrial enlargement, depending upon what kind of a TGA it is and what is the physiology, like what is the degree of shunt happening. But varying degrees of atrial enlargement can happen. And the QRS loop is here usually clockwise. So we expect a Q wave in 2-3 AVF and small r in the beginning in the 1 end AVL. And the type 1 TGA, that is with intact IVS, they will usually have a marked right axis deviation and right ventricular hypertrophy, which we understand is because of the RV being the systemic ventricle. So the type 2, that is TGA with a VSD, where there is unrestricted pulmonary blood flow and LV will have volume overload. So there will be a biventricular hypertrophy and the right axis deviation compared to type 1 will be lesser here. So it will be a moderate to negligible right axis deviation. Type 3 TGA, where there is where there is TGA with VSD with LVOT obstruction. So the LVOT obstruction will also contribute to some pressure overload of the LV, and thereby here also we'll have RVH and right axis deviation, but we'll have associated some degrees of LV hypertrophy also, but this usually can't be made out. And another thing is that although type 1 and type 2 TGA are states where the LV is relatively volume overloaded, still we don't find the classical appearance of the volume overloaded LV ECG, that is deep Q waves and tall R waves in the lateral leads. Here what we find is the absent Q and a small R in the left lateral leads, because of the this is mostly because of the RV being so much hypertrophic that it is not manifesting these vectors. Then the T waves will be taller in the right sided lead as compared to the left precordial leads. Coming on to the chest X-ray, classical appearance which we all know is the narrow pedicle with the egg on a string appearance, and the egg is pointing down and to the left because usually they will have a LV type of apex only. And if we do a lateral film, we'll have a circular shadow, like it appears as a globular mass sitting into the above the diaphragm. And most of the times they will have cardiomegaly with the pulmonary plethora. And Perloff has mentioned because of the bronchial arrangement, sometimes these patients can have a differential lung vascularity where the right lung is more vascular as compared to the left. This I am not very sure. So, and aorta, because it is right and anterior, it is not in the classical position. So it will not be forming the border, the base on the right side of the heart, but conditions where the aorta is dilated, that is where there is significant LVOT obstruction and the blood is being diverted through the VSD into the aorta. There will be a dilated aorta, and here the aorta can form the right heart border. The children who develop the PVOD will have a X-ray which is like Eisenmenger's X-ray, nothing special about that. And then the juxtaposed right atrial appendage will have a prominence, we can create a prominence just above the left atrial appendage at the left heart border, may or may not be found. And the
more than that, juxtaposed appendage will cause a straightening of right heart border. It will come almost close to the vertebral column, because that rounded contour is formed by the appendage normally. Okay. If you see a very straight right heart border close to the vertebra, then you should think of juxtaposed appendage.
Okay. Then type 3 TGA, if the LVOT obstruction is significant enough, then they will have a TOF-like appearance on the X-ray. And usually, because it's a conoventricular defect, most of the times the conoventricular defects are associated with disappearance of thymic shadow earlier, and in DTGA it usually disappears within 12 hours of birth. But nowadays there have been case reports where they have found that the thymus reappears after the TGA correction is done. There have been some case reports. So coming on to the echo, so what all we are supposed to look in the echo. So as a CHD, you should do a complete sequential assessment, and then only you won't miss most of the things. You always should look for the associated defects and associated anomalies. Look for what is the shunt happening, either ASD, VSD or a PDA. Most importantly, the size of the ASD or the PFO. As I already mentioned, the mechanism of the LVOT obstruction if present, the coronary arrangement, the juxtaposition, and the size of the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve annulus, because this is one of the most important things which determines the outcomes of arterial switch. So I have put some pictures of echo where we can understand what we are supposed to see in a child with a DTG, like if a neonate comes to us with cyanosis. So if we see the parasternal long axis, we'll see the LV connected to PA and RV opening into the aorta. Important thing is we will see two great arteries which are falling towards us in the PLAX. And on the color Doppler also, we can see the flow will be towards us. So this is one of the hints which we can understand that it is a TGA. Then in the classical four-chambered view, we'll see the LV being connected to the PA, which is bifurcating, and the RV is opening into the aorta. And the aorta, like when we see the short axis, we can make out that it is giving rise to the coronaries. And we can make out that there is a subaortic conus. I'll show. Then this is a case of a TGA, where we can make out the RV is connected to aorta, LV is connected to PA, and there is a VSD which is immediately below the great artery. So it is a doubly committed subarterial VSD. This is the
Can it be possible that you have a Gaurav? Can it be possible that you have a bifurcating artery from LV, but it is not PA?
Bifurcating artery from
When it is a hemitruncus.
Yes, Gautam.
Okay.
So if you have hemitruncus, RPA arising from aorta, at first glance you will think there is a bifurcating artery arising from LV. So how do you confirm?
Ma'am, you mean to say a bifurcating artery arising from the RV, right?
LV. See, in TGA, how do you say TGA? There is a bifurcating artery arising from LV, right?
LV. Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. I am saying there is a bifurcating artery, but it is not pulmonary artery. It is aorta.
Okay. So, in case of a hemitruncus, we will find something.
So how do you decide whether it is TGA or aorta?
Coronaries.
We will look for the coronaries, ma'am.
Yeah. So one is you look for coronaries. It may be difficult to see in small children, neonates. Then how will you confirm? You may not get short axis view at all.
Arch.
Ma'am, we can make arch.
Branches from the arch.
Yeah.
So
trace the artery to see which is forming the arch. Okay.
Arch.
Yeah. That is more easier to confirm than looking for coronaries.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Continue.
So this echo is across the atrial septum, where we can see that this is the defect, and we find some turbulence here. So after BAS, this has opened up very nicely, and there is an unrestricted mixing happening here. So this is one of the essential things we always look for in a child with a DTGA. And then we can make out that the conus is subaortic here. So this is the prominent circumferential conus, which is supposed to go like this. And so we can make out that the conus tissue is here subaortic. And as I said, that posterior malalignment is more common. So we can see here the RV is going into the aorta, and this is the conal septum which has deviated posteriorly and causing a subpulmonic obstruction. Coming on to the more important thing is the aorta and PA alignment. So in the short axis, we find the aorta which is right and anterior, and the PA which is left and posterior. This is the classical arrangement, and the coronary, that is the left coronary, is arising from the left sinus, and the right coronary is arising from the right sinus. So this is the most common and the most easily recognized type of coronary arrangement which we find in TGA. Then we can have the intramural. So this is the PA, this is the aorta, and we are finding one vessel which is in between, interposed between the two. So this is the intramural coronary course between the aorta and the PA. And what is this is on any other day, we all know that we say that this is a retro-aortic, like we will confuse it with a coronary sinus sometimes, but it is actually a retro-aortic coronary, which we say in a normal child, but here the PA is posterior. So here it is a retropulmonary artery coronary rather than a retro-aortic coronary. And the most commonly this artery will be a LCX. LCX is the one where I'll show subsequently how the LCX loops around the PA, behind the PA, and will give an impression here. And this is the arrangement which ma'am was mentioning, that there can be a true anteroposterior alignment of the aorta and the PA. And the arch, as madam mentioned, that we can see the arch vessels arising from the arch and make sure that it is the aorta. And here we can see the PDA, which is shunting from the aorta to PA. So these are the classical things which we are supposed to see in a DTGA on an echo. I have just added a few images of echoes post correction. So what are we supposed to see in a TGA after correction? So this is anterior, this is posterior. So PA has come anterior. So definitely this child has undergone ASO. And we can see here the left and the right coronaries arising from the facing sinuses. This is the classical appearance. That is the aorta is posterior and the PA and the bifurcation is falling upon the aorta. So this is the Lee-Comte's maneuver, and we can see on color Doppler how they are going, branching around the aorta. And one of the common complications which we find.
You can see the turbulence in flows also.
Yeah, ma'am.
So that Lee-Comte maneuver, yeah, you can see the turbulence in both the branch PAs.
Yeah.
So that is one of the important things you have to look post surgery. Flow in branch PAs.
Yeah. And one of the common complications which we come across post arterial switch is supravalvular neopulmonary stenosis. So here we can see that there is a supravalve stenosis, and rarely we can also have a supra-aortic, neo-aortic stenosis. And this is the image.
Why is supravalvular pulmonary common, not aortic common?
Lee-Comte, which stretches the pulmonary artery.
So you get branch PA stenosis. Actually, there the stretch is on the branch pulmonary artery. But supravalvular is MPA stenosis.
Yeah, ma'am. That is what. So the Lee-Comte is not affect that.
Lee-Comte is not the explanation. So when they see this pulmonary valve was the initial aortic valve.
Yeah, ma'am.
And when they do the surgery, they take out coronary buttons. They harvest a lot of tissue around the sinuses.
Okay.
And how is it filled up? It is filled up with the pericardium.
Okay.
There is a loss of tissue in the main pulmonary artery, and they use autologous pericardium to fill up. So sometimes that can fibrose and cause scarring.
Got it, ma'am.
Yeah.
So then the next thing that is pretty common is one of the commonest complications post ASO is the neo-aortic root dilatation and neo-aortic AR. So we can see here the LV is opening into the aorta, which is grossly dilated. So and a couple of images of post-atrial switch. So basically what we do in an atrial switch, we convert a DTGA into a CCTGA, a physiologically corrected circulation, not an anatomically corrected. So RV is still the systemic ventricle, which is now pressure and volume overloaded. And because RV is destined to fail at some point, being a systemic ventricle, it will have volume overload eventually because of the TR. And the IVS will bulge towards the LV and make the LV pancake shape. So this is one of the common images which we find post-atrial switch. And post-atrial switch, we have to look for baffle leaks and baffle obstruction. So here I have put one image, where the pulmonary venous confluence is leaking onto the other side, and thereby the device closure has been done for this baffle leak. So this was briefly about echo. So what is the importance of CT and MRI? They are very, very important for the follow-up post-surgery, because all these complications which Lokesh will be subsequently speaking on, the imaging is very important, and particularly the coronaries, as we all know that after arterial switch, the coronaries are very commonly affected. So they recommend that at least once at 5 to 10 years of age, there should be a non-invasive imaging of the coronaries, and even every 3 to 5 years, you should have a stress test. So CT and MRI is very important there. Then other complications, the supravalvular regurgitation stenosis, the neo-aortic root dilatation, and the branch P anatomy because of the Lee-Comte's, these all will be very easily assessed with a CT or MRI. So cardiac cath, we rarely do, not needed. But when we are doing PAS, we do a cath, and TGA, no matter how much oxygen you give, these children will never have a 100% arterial oxygen saturation, because we can understand that it is the cyanotic blood only which is circulating in the aorta, not the other way around. And in the old times, we used to do a laid back angio for the coronary anatomy. So the circuit in TGA is the SVC, IVC to RA, RV, and RV is opening into aorta. So we cannot enter the left side unless we have an associated defect. So either we take a venous access or an arterial access, we will end up in the right side, not on the left side. So what they do in the laid back angio, they enter from the femoral vein and go antegradely into the ascending aorta using a Burman catheter, which has a tip balloon at the tip and side holes at just proximal to the tip. So they will inflate the balloon in the ascending aorta, and with a slight alveocaudal angulation, they will inject the dye, and that will show the coronary anatomy. So this is the standard image which we are supposed to see in the TGA, which with the type A Yakub arrangement, where the left, now this is the left, this is the right, this is anterior, and this is posterior. This PA will be somewhere here, if we can understand this. So the left posterior sinus is giving rise to the left vein, and the right sinus is giving to the right coronary.
This is equivalent to your short axis view on echo. So this is the on-fast view of the sinuses. So actually, classic angulation is laid back, AP caudal. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. The other kinds of coronaries, what we can find arrangement. So
I think we have discussed this, no, Gaurav? You showed in the
Yeah, we'll skip this. Okay.
Yeah.
Then coming to the this thing, angiocardiogram. So here we can understand that the catheter has gone from the venous circuit into the RV, and the RV is filling up the anteriorly placed aorta, and from the PDA we can make out the PA is getting filled here. So aorta is anterior, PA is posterior. So this is the arrangement here. And how do you enter the left side is, as I told, because through the defects, either through the VSD or the ASD. And here again, we have mostly gone via the venous circuit through the RA across the ASD into the LA-LV, and then we have done the LV angio, which is filling the pulmonary circulation. So coming on to the management, the surgical aspects will be discussed by Lokesh. I'll be discussing the guidelines mostly. So surgery is the cure here, and surgery is indicated in all cases except those with PVOD. So as ma'am has mentioned so many times in the previous discussions, the acceptable saturation for a DTGA is usually more than 70%. And when there is no lactic acidosis and adequate peripheral perfusion, we can consider that this child has stable hemodynamics and SATs, and he does not need any urgent intervention. So if at all these criteria are not met, so we need a pre-surgical stabilization. So we start a PGE1 infusion, and once the baby is stable, we titrate it down to the lowest dose possible. And when do we do a BAS in this kind of subsets where the SATs are not maintained and hemodynamics is not maintained? So the class 1 indication is where the failing hemodynamics and SATs despite a EGE1 infusion with a restrictive ASD. The next indication will be in a neonate who is presenting late after 3 to 4 weeks, where we expect that there is an anatomical closure of PDA which has already happened, and the PGE1 will be ineffective. And the patient has a restrictive ASD with a falling saturation. There we can do BAS with a 2A indication. Then a child with a restrictive ASD who is not fit for immediate surgery, he can't be put on CPB because of the sepsis. So in that case, to salvage the child, we can do a BAS. And then in patients who have a large VSD or a PDA who is in CHF with a restrictive ASD, these children, if we open up the atrial septum, then that will allow more LA to RA shunting, thereby decompressing the LA and reducing the pulmonary venous hypertension and the pulmonary congestion. So that is one of the ways.
This is a 2A you have written. Where is it written? 2A? in spite of
Ma'am.
VSD and PDA.
Yeah, ma'am. It is given in this CHD guidelines only, ma'am.
CHD
This
guidelines by whom?
this one, ma'am. AIMS wala, that Anita
Indian
madam's.
Academy of Pediatrics.
Please don't quote this here. People will. There are many fallacies in that. You cannot do BAS in a child who has large VSD, no?
Okay,
PDA
ma'am.
with a restrictive ASD, yeah, acceptable. But you cannot do BAS in a child with VSD to control CHF. That doesn't make
Okay.
sense.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. I'll correct this one.
All other things are okay. Yeah, don't write this.
So
You only
moving
think
on to
about
the
it. Is it required? Large VSD present.
ma'am, your voice is not audible. No?
No, I mean, if you think for yourself, when the large VSD is present, which
Yeah,
can
ma'am.
shunt bidirectionally, why will you need a ASD?
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, because of the
There are
experimentation with
many wrong things in that Indian consensus. The older
Okay, ma'am.
one is better.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Coming to the surgery, so the type 1, which is the most common subset, the ASO is the procedure of choice, and ideal timing is 7 days to 3 to 4 weeks, because we want to do it before the LV regresses. So that is the class 1 recommendation. And if the child presents between 1 to 2 months of age, there also we can do a ASO. Sometimes the child might need an ECMO there in those cases to support the circulation. And when the child presents later, that is between 2 to 6 months of age, we usually go for a rapid 2-stage ASO, where in stage 1 of this ASO, we retrain the LV with a PA band and add an aortopulmonary shunt for adequate and regulated pulmonary blood flow. And this can also be achieved by stenting the PDA. That is a lower recommendation. The standard approach is by putting a PA band and aortopulmonary shunt, and then in the second stage we do the take down the PA band and the AP shunt and do the arterial switch after the LV has adequately trained. Then the other option in these case children will be, if the ASO or ECMO is ASO rapid 2-stage ASO or ECMO can't be done, then we can do a atrial switch in these kids who have presented slightly late. And kids who present after 6 months of life, that will be a very minute subset, because most of these children will have died by this time. So here, because the LV is totally retrained, the option will be atrial switch, and in selected cases we can go for a 2-stage ASO. Moving on to the subset with TGA with the VSD, here what we'll do is because the LV is adequately trained because of the VSD, we can go for a direct ASO with a VSD closure, and if at all there is a PDA ligation. This has to be done before 6 weeks, because these child will develop PVOD very early. And if at all this is associated with arch anomalies, then the surgery will be required much earlier, because the arch obstruction will lead to much more pulmonary plethora. So, and we recommend that it is recommended that you do it in a single stage, the whole thing. Then the type 3, where the patient has a significant LVOT obstruction. So we look at the mechanism of the LVOT obstruction. So if there is a discrete subvalvular obstruction, which is amenable to resection, and a normal PV annulus and the valve, you do a arterial switch and you can directly resect the subvalvular obstruction. Whereas if the obstruction is not resectable and the PV annulus and valve are hypoplastic, then we have we can't do the ASO. So we have other options which depend upon the age and presentation of the child. So if the child is presenting in the neonatal or the infantile stage, so what we'll do, we'll put a systemic to PA shunt for maintaining the pulmonary circulation and growth of the pulmonary arteries. And once the child is more than 10 kg or more than 2 years, then we can go for a Rastelli and root translocation. These surgeries will be discussed by Lokesh in the details. And Then,
Gaurav,
ma'am.
Gaurav,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
didn't tell assessment of LV by echo.
Regarding the training and retraining, ma'am.
No, when a child comes late, how do you assess LV preparedness?
That I have put, ma'am.
He has put, ma'am, Lokesh. That is why.
Lokesh is talking. Okay.
So this thing. So if the child now the problem with Rastelli is that we are putting a conduit there. So this conduit, if we do it in the very early stage, the size of the conduit will be very small. So we want to delay the Rastelli as far as possible. So if at all the child is presenting between 4 to 6 months of age, then we can go ahead with the REV procedure where we do a tissue augmented anastomosis, which Lokesh will talk. And then between 6 to 9 months, we can do the Nikaido. And between 6 to 12 months, we can do the root translocation.
What is
Now,
the difference between all this?
Ma'am?
What is the difference between all this? Rev, Nikaido, and pulmonary root translocation.
Ma'am, in REV procedure, basically we do the infundibular resection. We root the LV to the aorta, and we do a tissue augmented anastomosis of the RV to PA. We don't use a conduit compared to the Rastelli. Ma'am, your voice is very faint.
Nikaido? Very faint. In Nikaido, now you can hear better?
Yeah. Ma'am,
so in Nikaido?
In Nikaido, basically, ma'am, we do the aortic translocation. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
when do you want to do Rev? When do you want to do Nikaido?
Basically, ma'am, depends upon the time when the child presents. And
no, like, your time. How can you say in 2 months, 4 to 6 months, you're deciding on Rev? 6 to 9 months is Nikaido. Okay. And see, all these procedures, is when you want to achieve a complete repair without putting a conduit.
Yeah, ma'am.
That is the basic idea.
Yeah.
And it's not totally age dependent. It's like when you want to correct it off, what do you look at? You look at PA anatomy, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so PA anatomy is the most important thing when you do these procedures. Both Rev and Nikaido are done for TGA, VSD, PS.
Yeah.
And it is so these PS will be small.
Small, yeah.
Because restricted pulmonary blood flow.
Yes.
So unless you have good PA anatomy, you cannot connect the entire systemic venous return to the pulmonary artery. So most important determinant is having a good size PA.
Okay.
The next important determinant is the surgical skill. These are extremely complicated procedures. Why?
Okay.
They have to cut open the ventricle wall.
Yeah.
See, cutting open the ventricle is never done in most of the surgical procedures. Okay.
Yes.
So in Rev also you have to cut open RV and put the PA with the pericardial patch.
Yes.
Again, you will have a problem of pulmonary regurgitation. Though you put a monocus valve, it won't work for very long.
Okay.
In Nikaido, you take out the whole root and you put onto. Nikaido is done when you cannot root the VSD.
Okay.
In Rev, you do an ioto-LV tunnel.
Yeah.
And suppose you have a non-rootable VSD, then you have to take away the whole aortic root. So you have to cut so much part of RV, no? So all these are very morbid procedures requiring a lot of surgical skill. So just don't, age is not the only criteria to decide on the type of procedure.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Understood. So moving on, the DTGA with VSD with mild to moderate LVOT obstruction, that is the best subset. They will present late, usually beyond 1 to 2 years. And here we can, according to the anatomy and as ma'am mentioned, according to the surgeon's experience, we can go ahead with any of these procedures. And if the VSD is remote and non-rootable and the anatomy is not amenable to a biventricular repair, then we can do a palliative procedure in the form of a cavopulmonary circulation. So the follow-up after, yeah, ma'am.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. Follow up after surgery. These children need lifelong follow up, and on every visit we should do a thorough clinical evaluation, ECG echo. These things will be dealt by Lokesh, but the important thing is that coronary evaluation has to be done at least once via imaging modality around 5 to 10 years of age for patients who are asymptomatic, and IE prophylaxis for the first 6 months after surgery. So these recommendations, Lokesh, are you covering this?
No, not all this.
Okay. So I think, ma'am, shall we discuss it now or after Lokesh finishes?
See, what are the things you
This is
have to
this
discuss?
is basically follow what he is telling now.
Coronary assessment.
Yeah. Ma'am.
See, Lokesh, what are you talking on? Hello?
Lokesh, ma'am is asking. Hello, Lokesh? Ma'am, Lokesh is basically this thing. He's talking about the surgical aspects and the complications.
Okay. See, I think today we don't have time for all that. If you want to finish this follow-up, you can finish it today. Lokesh can do it in another class.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So
Lokesh topics we'll discuss separately.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. I'll briefly just touch upon the complications. Like we all know that after atrial switch, the common
Lokesh is here. Lokesh, how much time you will need?
Lokesh?
He said half an hour, ma'am.
Lokesh has taken a break,
At least
I think.
half an hour, he said.
Half an hour, a little unlikely. If we have to discuss in detail, half an hour might be rushed.
Okay, ma'am.
Today you finished,
Yes,
Gaurav,
ma'am.
what all topics you have prepared?
Yeah. Just I'm like it will take me mostly 5 to 10 minutes more. So we all know that post atrial switch, the common complications are arrhythmias in the form of SA node dysfunction, and patients can also develop bradycardias, and they can also have atrial arrhythmias quite commonly, including the intra-atrial reentrant tachycardias. And the other thing that they have is baffle leaks and baffle obstructions can happen, and they can also have being the RV as the systemic ventricle and the tricuspid valve as the systemic AV valve, they can have TR and RV dysfunction. So these are the things which we are supposed to look on a follow-up after atrial switch. So that is what the American guidelines recommend. So class 1 recommendation is that always look for bradycardia and sinus node dysfunctions post atrial switch, and annual imaging is recommended either by a echo or cardiac MRI following the atrial switch. And because these patients are at risk of developing arrhythmias and they might need ICD or pacemakers, so because the anatomy is so altered here, the baffle, we have created a baffle from the left atrium, the pulmonary veins into the RV, and which is going to the aorta. So we should, if we need to put a pacemaker lead there, we should look whether there is a communication or not. So if that is a two-way recommendation, and that can be seen with bubble contrast studies also. And then the management of arrhythmias they recommend is according to the guideline directed management for other arrhythmias. But the important thing is that you always try to restore the sinus rhythm here, because these children are at a very precarious state of the circulation. So any loss of the atrial kick will contribute to significant deterioration. So we have to restore the sinus rhythm as far as possible. Is the recommendations after DTGA with atrial switch.
Madam?
And moving on to the complications after arterial switch, and all the is recommended.
Madam, this atrial switch is done commonly nowadays for this TGA. Like arterial switch is preferred, no ma'am, usually?
Your voice is getting cut. I heard only atrial switch.
Ma'am, atrial switch is preferred nowadays. Like is it done commonly compared to the arterial switch in the TGA?
I can't hear you, Varshit.
Ma'am, Varshit is asking whether atrial switch is done in the current era.
Hello?
Hello? Ma'am,
Madam,
you hear us,
atrial
ma'am?
switch, how common is it done in the current era when there is arterial switch available?
See, atrial switch is not the preferred surgery, but what do you do when patients come late, beyond 2 months, 3 months?
Okay.
Rapid PA banding, rapid stage switch is an expensive and a morbid option. Okay. You
Okay.
cannot keep the child in hospital inside the ICU for 1 month because it carries high mortality. It requires very intensive management in the immediate post-op period after PA banding. And you have to do 2 surgeries. What is the cost involved? And imagine ventilating the child for 2 weeks. As such, we ventilate for 10 to 12 days. So rapid switch is actually not a preferable option in many of the centers in India
Okay.
because cost itself gets doubled and it carries high mortality. You have to do a BT shunt, you have to do a PA band, and within 7 days to 10 days, you have to take up again for a surgery.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So one easy option is doing the PDA stent, which some people have shown is going to be helpful. Otherwise, the safer option for you to send the patient home when you don't have a LVAD, when you don't have a ECMO, is to do an atrial switch. And in our country, very of the patients come late. TGA babies intact septum, many of them die. If they survive because of a large AST, they will come late. So all those patients, we end up doing atrial switches.
Okay.
And if you have a CTGA patient and you want to do a complete repair, you have to do atrial switch with Rasto.
With arterial. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Moving on to the arterial switch. Arterial switch, we know the common complications. The most important is the coronary complications that can happen. So coronary ostial obstructions can happen. And apart from that, there is supravalvular neopulmonary stenosis, and rarely there can be regurgitation. And then there is a neo-aortic root dilatation and root regurgitation. So based on these, what the recommendations that they say are that post arterial switch, annual imaging in the form of echo or cardiac MRI is essential to look for these complications. And the coronary anatomy should be assessed at least once around 5 to 10 years of age in patients who are asymptomatic. Patients who are symptomatic, in those patients, you should go for a myocardial perfusion and see actually whether there is the cause of the chest pain or the angina is the coronary or not. You should always have a high level of suspicion for these complications in these patients. And if there is a significant coronary obstruction, then it should be addressed according to the standard guidelines for coronary artery disease. And important thing is that if there is a catheter or surgical, like there is a obstruction in the pulmonary circuit, then we can do a catheter or a surgical intervention as a two-way recommendation. So that is what I have written in briefly below. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss was what are the indications for PA banding in a DTGA. So the main indication we all know that if the child presents late, then we will have to do a two-stage ASO where we retrain the LV. And then the other indication is that if rarely, like this is not encountered, this kind of situation I don't think is encountered anymore, but post-atrial switch, if the patient wants to undergo the corrective surgery in the form of arterial switch, because the atrial switch is not going to last long because the RV is definitely going to fail at some time. So there again, to retrain the LV, the PA band can be done. But important thing is that even this has to be done before 12 years of age, because Moss mentions that beyond 12 years of age, it is not possible for the LV to be retrained. Then the third indication will be post-atrial switch if the patient presents with RV dysfunction or TR. So we had seen the echo image where the RV is dilated. So what the PA band will do here is it will increase the obstruction to LV outflow, thereby restoring the geometry of the interventricular septum and thereby restoring the RV geometry, and this will reduce the magnitude of TR and thereby the RV dysfunction. And this similar kind of indication is for a patient who presents with a DTGA with VSD with LVOT obstruction, who presents late with RV dysfunction or TR. So in those cases also, as a palliative measure, we can do a PA band.
But there is already an LVOTO. Why do you want to do a band?
Ma'am?
Your last option.
Yeah, ma'am.
Your last option is TGA, VSD, LVOTO.
Yes, ma'am. That is what I found very controversial here, but somehow Moss had mentioned it. So I thought that maybe he's talking about a place where the circulation is balanced, where there is some mild degree of LVOT obstruction, and the child never presented itself. He had a balanced kind of state where eventually he has presented for the first time with RV dysfunction, and by putting the PA band, we are increasing the LVOT obstruction. Like this was mentioned in Moss, that is why I mentioned. Otherwise, I wouldn't have mentioned. It is. Hello.
Okay, that's all, Gaurav?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am.
I think enough for today. Yeah, you want to listen to more?
Enough,
No,
ma'am.
ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, ma'am.
Lokesh has gone off to sleep.
No, no,
Awake?
ma'am. I'm there, ma'am. He has taught most of the things which
How much time you will take?
I'll take maybe more than half an hour. Hello?
Audio is terrible. I can't hear. Actually, if it is not long, you club with other topic you want to discuss, and we discuss together in some other day.
Okay, ma'am.
Sure,
Okay.
ma'am. Sure.
Yes, sir.
Mostly, ma'am, Lokesh.
Lokesh, you're covering a little more on complications.
Yeah, ma'am. I'm covering complications more than I'm basically covering all surgeries and then complications related to them.
Okay, fine. Okay, we can decide later, some other time.
Sure.
Any questions? Anybody wants any clarifications?
No, ma'am. I think no one is replying. So I think.
Ma'am, actually during oximetry, PA saturation being more than iota saturation, should we say? I mean, how do you differentiate it from unfavorable streaming in admixture versus transposition physiology, ma'am? Like I'm talking not about
just by looking at the numbers.
Yeah, because like once like we were shown an oximetry and it was actually a PA more than iota, but only marginally higher, not like significantly higher. So somebody, I mean, the answer was transposition physiology, but somebody told why can't it be admixture with favorable streaming, and the other person was actually told that it was wrong. I just wanted to ask, based on oximetry, what else suggests that it cannot be admixture, or is it always a differential? Especially in marginally higher things I'm talking about.
I don't know. See, if you have a reasonably good systemic saturation, above 85%, okay, that is suggestive of a good mixing. In a TGA intact septum, without significant shunts, okay, your saturation not be very good. Unless you are maintain large PD or a large AS. Only if you have a TGA VSD with increased flow, then your aortic saturation also will be high. At that time, there is no way you can, just by looking at the numbers, you can say whether it is TGA VSD or an admixture physiology.
Okay.
What was the difference in the aorta and PA saturation?
7.
So then you should call it admixture, no? Why do you want to say transposition?
That's what, like, but usually transposition, if PA is more than iota and iota saturation is around less than 80, and in oximetry it would fit into a transposition physiology, no, ma'am?
Yeah, when the saturation difference between PA and iota is very minimal.
Okay.
So the question is, what is minimal?
That's what I wanted to know. Like, when do we say that it could be an admixture with a favorable streaming, and when do we say that it is transposition physiology? Is there any cutoff? Because I tried checking for it, it was not given anywhere. Just wanted to ask generally, because if there's a gross difference, like in a simple TGA, like we see saturation of 50 in an iota and PA saturation being 90, and RB to PA
Yeah.
is 90, then we know, I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, LV to PA is 90, then we know it is a straightforward TGA. I'm talking about
Yeah.
like when we're just looking at PA and iotic saturation.
See, when a PA is completely arising from LV, you expect the saturation to be 90 or above, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Whereas in admixture physiology, you will have a saturation in all chambers close to around 85% when the PVR is normal.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so when the difference is not too high and all chambers it is close to 85, you should take it as an admixture physiology. When there is, I think, if the difference between iota and PA is more than 10%, like what we say, why do we take 10%? Because by error, you can have a variation in saturation between 3 to 5% between different samples. So
Okay.
if you have a saturation difference, I suppose more than 7 to 10%, I think you should take it as streaming.
Sure, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have any
So
reference for that.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. Thanks.
So it will be safe for us to say
Yeah,
that when the PA saturation is around 90, then it will be better to say TGA in this kind of setup.
Yeah. If you have a very high PA saturation, definitely you should say transposition.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Bye.